Hi, this is Brent Pope on RT Sport. I'm on Facebook, Ask the Analyst, and that's me. Okay, there's some questions come in. Really appreciate that. Try to answer them as honestly as I can. Some of them are very good, to be honest. So, first of all, I'll take Damien Cullinan. Will people ever be happy? We would have sold our grannies for a win in August, and now we're grumbling about a solid win in awful conditions. I don't necessarily agree that it was a solid win, Damon. I think it was a win. I think if you'd said before the match 22-10, you'd have had to say that Eddie O'Sullivan would have bitten his hand off for that. I mean, the USA are possibly the worst team in this competition. I think you'll find that they'll struggle to beat Russia. Yes, we would have loved to win in the lead-up because I was talking about the whole time about getting momentum, and I think if you look at the difference between the way Wales played going to the World Cup confident after their wins against Argentina and England at home as compared to Ireland, they didn't start particularly well. It took them to the middle of the second half to get going. So, yeah, a win's a win, and I accept that, but I mean, you've really got to set the bar a bit higher than, I suppose, stumbling to a win against the US. I think, you know, better things to come. Yes, the underdog tag is there now, and they will play better against Australia. I know that, but just basis on that game, I think, you know, take the win by all means, but certainly a lot to do. James Kavanagh, when Ireland got it right on Saturday, they looked a very good side in awful conditions. Yeah, people keep going back to the conditions, but I mean, in fact, if you look at the US, they actually held ball quite well. They retained ball quite well when they got it. Ireland seemed to be, you know, how many times did Tommy Bowe drop the ball, which is uncharacteristic for him. You know, there were knock-ons by Conor Murray, Gordon Darcy, a few wild passes. So I accept that the conditions were bad. But, I mean, I think the USA, you've got to give them credit. Most of those players are amateurs. Most of the players come from California where it's not raining. Ireland have some, I suppose, experience the rain. Certainly Declan Kidney talked before the game about, you know, Connacht being a good breeding ground for rain. So, yes, they did look a good side when they played well. You know, created a couple of good tries, especially the Tommy Bowe second one. But I don't think they took advantage of where every coach looks and says, where's the opposition weakest, where are we strongest? I think the USA were weak up front and we didn't really take them on. Also, James goes on to say there will be no 60-point plus victories at this World Cup. The supposed weaker nations are bringing a very well-organised defences with them. I think you're going to be wrong, James. I think, you know, to say there'll be no 60 plus victories, I think that possibly New Zealand will run 60 points plus through Japan this week. Having said that, I think the opening weekend belonged to the minnows, the so-called minnows of rugby, or the weaker teams, as you call it. I think Japan were brilliant, Romania were brilliant. I think the divide has closed, but I think there will be a couple of 60-point margins before the pool stages are out. But I do take on what you're saying. I think the weaker sides have really brought something to us, and in fact, you know, that weekend belonged to them. Eleanor Grace, do you think that Ireland have improved since their warm-up games? Even with the win yesterday, people are still criticising the team. Look, Eleanor, this criticising the team somewhat amuses me a bit because, you know, at one stage Ireland were ranked third in the world. They're the 2009 Grand Slam champions. You have the Heineken Cup through Leinster. You have the Magners League plus Heineken Cup through Munster. You know, players can't be sensitive. Some of these guys are making 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 euros a year. The States had 4 professional players. They were accountants. They were bricklayers. So, I mean, you know, I think this criticising is getting, people are getting a bit carried away with it. Teams have to stand on their performance. I don't mind if they go out against Australia and Ireland play well and they're beaten. That may be the case. But, I mean, at least you can stand by and respect the performance and say they went out, it was a brilliant performance. I think anybody watching that match, anybody, apart from the really die-hard fans who can't see that most people that have come up to me, 99.9% have said, look, they were disappointed in the performance. So you've got to call it as it is. We're there to maybe call it as the people on the street see it. Did I think it was a great Irish performance? No. I mean, did you, Eleanor, realistically think that it was a great Irish performance? So, yeah, people are going to keep criticising because they're professional athletes. Niamh Barron, who is responsible for Ireland's poor performances to date, the coaching staff or the players themselves? It's funny, Niamh, because you see the poor performance. The last interview I was saying stop criticising them, so, you know, who's right and who's wrong. Look, I think both, it's a collective responsibility. I think there's what I call as a bit of collective amnesia at this World Cup. Suddenly after 4 or 5 sort of, I suppose, you know, average performances since the last Six Nations win against England, which was brilliant. I mean, Ireland hasn't played particularly well. You know, you'd be foolish to think they did. So, I mean, I think they were the only side. They were the only ranked side in the world going into this World Cup without any momentum, without a win. So I think, look, both parties have to take some responsibility. Declan Kidney's probably getting it in the neck at the moment because he's the coach, and people would say the buck stops with him. But in my opinion, as a player, the buck often stops with the players. You know, players have to make decisions on the field. The coach can't play the game for them. So it's a bit of both, really. So hopefully they'll get it right for Australia, and I'm sure they will for the rest of the tournament. But to date, yeah, it's been fairly disappointing. So both parties have to take responsibility. Paul Kennedy, considering we've been so poor recently, was it right to extend Declan Kidney's contract? Well, this is a bit of an acorn with me. I've never agreed with giving a contract before the biggest, I suppose, the equivalent of the Olympics to rugby. I mean, you know, given in the business terms, if you were a businessman or a CEO and the biggest sales conference was coming up, would you give your salesperson an extended contract before you saw the results? I think what the RFU should have done, really, is said to Declan Kidney, okay, you know, success is a quarter-final or better. If you get to a semi-final or a final, there'll be a bonus in it for you, and there'll be extended contract, but we have to look at things. I mean, God forbid if Ireland didn't make it out of the group. Now, I'm sure they will, but if they didn't happen to, then we're going to come back and we're going to face the same situation that Eddie O'Sullivan had, that you've given Declan Kidney another 2 years or whatever. Now what do we do? Because there'd be people screaming for his head. But I suppose so. It's just one of those things. I mean, I suppose that the coaches want security in their lives as much as the players. But no, I don't think they should have really. I think they should have waited till after the World Cup. Now, Bettina, or Bettner, Lennon, Bettina, I'm sorry, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong. Bettner. Lennon. Should Kidney react quick at what he sees on the pitch, e.g. when Sexton missed the kicks? What was the reason for not bringing O'Gara on right after break or even before? This is the age-old question, I suppose, is, you know, when do you change a player? Look, you've got to stick with some players. All players have a bit of an off day. You know, obviously, if a player is missing, look at England. Johnny Wilkinson stayed on the park after missing, 3, 4, 5 penalties, which was unheard of for him. I think you just have to let players bed themselves in. You can't go changing players every 5 minutes because they miss a line out or because they miss a kick. There's certain positions, certainly hooker, if a thrower is not hitting the line out 3, 4, 5 times, then yeah, you've got to get him off. If a prop is in trouble, you've got to get him off. If a kicker misses 2 or 3 kicks or misses 2 or 3 line kicks and you've got a guy like O'Gara, or conversely, you've got Sexton on the bench, then you've got to make the change. What I didn't see on last week against the US, which was a wee bit disappointing for me, was that, you know, where they were weakest was in the set pieces. Ireland mauled the US for the first 5 or 10 minutes, all off the park. They scrummed them off the park, and yet that's not where they chose to play. So I would just say, you know, play to where your strengths are. But certainly you've got to give players a chance to redeem themselves. Cahill, are players being picked on historical value and not form? Yeah, that's always been a criticism. That's something that Declan Kidney has to live by. Every players have their, I suppose, their players that they prefer. You know, there was some talk of Paddy Wallace. There was other talk of other players around. But, you know, you've got to rely on the coach's judgment. He's seen a lot of the players more than we are. I don't think that happens so much anymore. I think that Ireland only have a small enough panel of players. So I don't think really there's a lot of players picked on historical value. Some people argue that there's some players in there that have maybe, I say, past their sell-by date and maybe need to be refreshed or looked at, and that's a point. I mean, I think there are some players possibly there that aren't playing at the peak of their form, and some new players, an injection of youth or an injection of new players may change that. But generally speaking, most of the players, the best players in Ireland, are out there at the moment. Tina Quinn, why do we not perform at the Rugby World Cup? That's a good point, Tina. Funny enough, I was looking at the stats. I was doing something for the Herald today, and I was looking at the stats, and I saw that, in fact, in all the years since 1987, Ireland have only beaten 2 ranked sides, and that is Wales and Argentina. And that was amazing. I was looking at who they've beaten. It's Japan, it's Namibia, it's Georgia, it's Romania, those sides. So you're right, they haven't they've always struggled come the World Cup time. I suppose a bit like New Zealand. New Zealand have struggled as well. I think, having said that, the omens look reasonably good for Australia because, in fact, if you look at the results against Australia in the World Cups, they've been fairly good. I don't know that there's any reason. I think that, you know, people moves on to the next question, I suppose, from Edward Wilson as well. Are the management and fans too ambitious? Possibly at times, but I mean, the team have set their own standards here. And I mean, I think, you know, Grand Slam champions in 2009, Triple Crown champions for a number of years, Heineken Cup, Magners League. So I think Irish rugby has grown peripherally. And I mean, I think they have a right and they have a respect to be rated. So I think that not too ambitious. I think Brian O'Driscoll spoke about it. I think realistic ambitions this year are still on track. You know, they're not playing particularly well, I admit that, but they could turn all that around against Australia. They could beat Italy. I think they'll get out of their group. Then they they can have a real one-off go at South Africa. And look what Wales proved last week, anything could happen. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Ireland could still get to a semi-final, and that would be a major result, top 4 in the world. Where are they ranked now? Yeah, they're probably floating around sort of, 5, 6, that's their rate. So, I mean, that's, they're not too ambitious. Just moving on to out half, Bridget McGrath, do you think it's very odd that Redden and Sexton have only played together for about 15 minutes over the last 5 matches? Yeah, I do, to be honest, Bridget. I think if that was going to be your pairing at the World Cup, and because they have this telepathic relationship for Leinster, I think that possibly Aaron Redden and Johnny Sexton, who played so well last year for the Heineken Cup, yeah, I think they should have been given a bit more game time. But I think Declan Kidney, in fairness, was looking at the different combinations, looking at young Conor Murray, looking at Thomas O'Leary early on, and looking at the likes of these other players, Isaac Boss. So I think he had to sort of mix and match a wee bit. But I would have liked to have seen teams, because when I played, I always preferred playing with players that I knew. Players that I knew the way they ran, players that I knew the way they passed, players that I knew how they would act on the park. So, yeah, a bit surprised that they haven't had more game time together. Tony Dunn, scrum half. Were they wrong to leave out Peter Stringer from the squad? Peter Stringer is loved in Munster, and Peter Stringer has been a fantastic ambassador for Irish rugby. We all know that. But I think they've probably got the combinations right. Conor Murray is the future of the game. Owen Redden had a great season last year, and Isaac Boss. Isaac Boss has been quite underrated. The fact is, Isaac Boss is also in New Zealand. He'll know the conditions. He can play it physically. I think once they took Murray, they were never going to take Peter Stringer. I suppose a guy that's slightly unlucky in some sense is O'Leary, because he was 1 or 2, and then suddenly, based on one game against France, he's out to number 3 or 4 or number 4 in the pecking list order. So a bit unfortunate for him. But I think they probably got the combination fairly well right. The centres. There were lots of questions came in here, but we just took the main ones. Paul and Cloder. Should Darcy be dropped? Should Bowe, Earls and McFadden be picked in the centre? No, I don't think Gordon Darcy. Gordon Darcy's world class on his game, and again, we talk about telepathic relationships. He's played with Brian O'Driscoll most of his rugby career. When they're on song and playing well, there's possibly no better centre partnership in the world. So, no, I think he's got to be given his chance. I mean, there's also talk, and I've often said it, there's a situation that in time Brian O'Driscoll could consider moving into 12 to allow the likes of a Tommy Bowe, Luke Fitzgerald in the future, McFadden to go in at outside centre. But I think for the time being, I think our best combination, I'm only talking about the World Cup here, the best combination is still Gordon Darcy and Brian O'Driscoll. There's one thing you can't beat at World Cups, and I'll always talk about it, South Africans, the All Blacks, the Australians, you can't beat experience. Trying someone in at the last moment against the likes of Australia or Italy, crucial matches, no. I wouldn't go for it. I'd stay with Darcy. He'll only get better, and I think he'll prove people wrong. I think a lot of players will prove people wrong this weekend against Australia. Kieran Burke, what about putting Sean O'Brien at inside centre? Yeah, it's an idea, but I don't think it will work. I think Sean O'Brien is a great ball carrier. I think his position actually, in my mind, is number 8, because he's powerful, and for the first 5 or 6 metres off the back of a ruck or a maul, he can be devastating. I think putting him on at number 7, to be honest, I'd agree with George Hook here and others. I think it negates his strengths. His strengths are out in the open, crashing and bashing. I think if you play him at 7, he's going to get tangled up in a tight game with the likes of Pollock and some of these other genuine open side flankers. But I don't think putting him at where was it, inside centre, would work. Yeah, would he get over the gain line? Absolutely, but you've got to have a whole lot of other skills, be able to pass off both hands, be able to kick properly, and I think forwards just don't have that skill levels. They have a lot more skills, but they don't have the skills the backs have. Second row, Enda Lonergan. Do you think that O'Callaghan's penalty count against presumably against the USA, warrants his constant inclusion, and why can't O'Connell not make the gain line carrying the ball? I wasn't wary. You must have been watching it close to me. I wasn't wary of O'Callaghan's extreme penalty counts. I think Paul O'Connell is a designated ball carrier, so and one of the finest second rows in the game. Maybe he takes it on too much, or maybe he's given the responsibility of taking it on too much. That is why I said, maybe a guy like Ferris should come on. He played well. Stephen Ferris took on a lot of ball last week, and that maybe takes it away a bit from Paul O'Connell, because I think teams target certain players, and I think it's no secret that Paul O'Connell is one of Ireland's major ball carriers, along with Sean O'Brien, Heslip, I suppose, Leamy when he plays, and O'Brien. So I think that teams target Paul O'Connell, unfortunately. But there's another thing to that. He often takes out 2 or 3 defenders and allows more freedom of space somewhere else. I mean, unfortunately, at the moment, Ireland don't have the luxury, I suppose, in the front row, apart from Keane Healy, that, you know, they have a ball carrier. Mike Ross is a great scrummager, but he's not a ball carrier. So I think Paul O'Connell has taken on that responsibility and does it brilliantly usually. But I think you're right. I think maybe some of that has to be transferred to other players. Just basically what changes would need to be made if Ireland were going to try to beat New Zealand. I think trying to play teams at their own game, I mean, what you've got to do is come up with your own game plan. The teams that have beaten New Zealand have said, look, they have extreme self-belief for a start. You know, you cannot go into New Zealand playing this subconscious game where you think, okay, you know, play into our shell. You've got to go out really and throw caution to the wind. And that is when, we talked about it earlier, that is when I would look at mixing up selection. I would look at taking a huge risk. I would look at trying to match the New Zealanders around the field. Again, I would look at a guy like Ferris into the second row, speed the pack up, make it a much smaller yet dynamic pack, try to beat the All Blacks at their own game in the sense that, you know, you're not going to beat them by playing a sort of a slower pack and just going from set piece to set piece. Quick throw-ins, a bit like the way Japan played against France, you know, vary things up. New Zealanders don't like it being varied. They like to be able to look at the game and say, okay, this is where we're stronger, this is where the opposition weak. They're amazing at analysing opposition sides. That's their strength. They have a huge crew, I suppose, behind the scenes, looking at other teams, looking at where they're good, looking at where they're bad. So I think Ireland would need to sort of put some sort of game plan that the New Zealanders wouldn't expect. That's the only way, realistically, Ireland could beat New Zealand. The last one, I suppose, I better look at the questions here. It's on Hook. Irene and Jill, can you stop George Hook talking? The answer is no. He is too negative. The answer is yes. So that's a short one. Several people have asked us to explain the Morecambe and Wise thing. For those that haven't seen, that's the breakfast, I suppose, the breakfast skit that George and I did based on the Morecambe and Wise stripping in the breakfast. Look, to be honest, people have taken it, I think some of them taken it a bit too seriously. As some people said, it wasn't done on a major RT budget. In fact, it was filmed in my house just with a couple of guys and one camera, so it only took 3 hours to do. Look, it was just a bit of tongue-in-cheek and a bit of fun for the World Cup. I think, can't we take ourselves all too seriously sometimes? And I think somebody came up with an idea in RT that would look quite funny to maybe, you know, take the mickey out of ourselves, and that's what we've done. To attract so much, I suppose, comment, some of it negative, you know, is this where the fun is going? Look, it cost nothing. It was a bit of crack. It was done in 2 or 3 hours in my kitchen, and we just thought we'd put a bit of a fun spin on the World Cup. That's all. Finally, Jonathan McFadden, how do you rate our prospects for the rest of the tournament? I think I've answered that, Jonathan. I think out of the group, I think they'll play well against Australia. I think they'll beat Italy, and I think we're going to meet, when I say we, you'll take it I'm talking Irish now, I think we're going to play South Africa in the quarterfinal. And I really think, and I mean George would be here rubbishing me, but I really think in a one-off match against the Springboks with a full-strength side that Ireland have a real chance of in that particular game. So thanks very much for all your questions. I hope I haven't been too long-winded or dilly-to-dally around the point, but we do appreciate your feedback and we do take it seriously. Thanks very much.